Maestro, and you have the poster there.
I do.
So can I ask you how you came up with the title? Why Viva Maestro?
Well, we wanted a title that would alert audiences to the fact that we were featuring a film about the world's most celebrated and dynamic conductor of his generation. But we also wanted a film that revealed something about the nature of the film itself. And for folks like you who have seen the film, you know that there are two maestros in this film. And by the time audiences get to the end of it, they'll discover that, yes, we're celebrating Gustavo Dudamel, but we're also really celebrating someone else who's very important to him.
How did you first hear about Gustavo?
Well, I'm a citizen of Los Angeles, and you can't live in Los Angeles and not know about Gustavo Dudamel. He arrived like a bolt of lightning in his mid-20s and transformed the classical music scene in Los Angeles. And he'd been in my consciousness since he arrived, but it wasn't until one of the producers of the film suggested back in 2016 to me that he might be a subject for a documentary that I thought, oh my gosh, this would be a perfect subject for a film, and I would be so lucky to be able to share with audiences his energy, his genius, and his values, his commitment to music and art's transformative capacity, its ability to change lives and communities.
And you went deep because you started from where he comes from, which is El Sistema in Venezuela.
I did. The first place that Gustavo suggested we begin filming was in Caracas, and that was music to my ears because I love taking audiences to places, you know, around the world and to immersing them in very specific dynamic cultures. And in this case, I could do that, and at the same time, really acquaint viewers with where Gustavo came from and with the musicians that he grew up with and with the kind of energy and dynamism that really makes him such a special conductor. So it was the perfect place to start.
Do you think when you approach Gustavo about this, I feel like maybe another reasons maybe why he signed on was to introduce his foundation and where he came from, right? And to just talk about his own maestro.
Well, initially, I think his impulse was a little less specific than that. He is on a mission, I think, to share the richness of classical music with audiences that may not be acquainted of it, that may not know and understand what beauties are in this music and how rich and varied it is, that it's not just the music of Beethoven, but it's also the music of Maestro Arturo Marquez and Cecilia Ortiz and all these wonderful other musicians. So I think that the initial impulse was that he could reach a wide audience, and reach a wide audience with the magic of orchestral music. But there was also, I'm sure, behind him a deep desire and drive to share the message of El Sistema, which is that music is for everyone and can change lives and can mobilize communities, and by extension, the message of Maestro Jose Antonio Abreu, who was the founder of El Sistema. Yes, absolutely.
And obviously, you couldn't avoid a little bit of politics in there.
Well, you know, I had set out to make a film that really took me away from the problems of the world. I had made a feature documentary about the Darfur crisis. I had made a feature documentary about allegations of global systemic fraud against the company Herbalife, and I wanted to do a film that focused on someone trying to bring beauty and art into the world rather than expose problems of the world and try to find solutions to them. As it happened, the problems of the world imposed themselves into Gustavo's life and into the film. We started filming in February of 2017, and at the end of March of 2017, Venezuela erupted into 100 days of very, very intense, oftentimes violent street protests. And those protests had a deep impact on Gustavo and shifted the direction of the film.
Everything, pretty much, including, you know, his tour, which this was based on the tour that was taking place, correct?
Yeah, we had intended to follow Gustavo over the course of a year or two of his life, dramatizing him bringing music into the world. And one of the orchestras we were going to focus on was the Los Angeles Philharmonic, which we did, and the other was the Simon Bolivar Symphony Orchestra, the Venezuelan orchestra that he'd grown up with. And that orchestra we followed on a tour of Europe in March, and they were planning to go to China in October. But as a consequence of the unrest in Venezuela, those tours ended up getting canceled, and really upended both Gustavo's life and the lives of the musicians and the course of our film, because we needed, with Gustavo, to follow how he would react and respond to these unexpected developments. Um, and and the way he responded, I think, is really quite inspirational, Nancy. I mean, he was able to find a way to continue making music and a way to respond to the troubles of Venezuela in an affirmative, very artistic way, and one that I think audiences will find quite inspirational.
And this film also displays how these people of art will be judged for not speaking and for speaking up, right?
Well, that was a huge pressure that Gustavo was under, and as many of your viewers may know, he chose to speak out over the course of that period in 2017, and there were tough consequences as a result of that. But out of all of that comes an affirmation of his belief and Maestro Abreo's belief in music's capacity to bring us together and to remind us not so much of the things that divide us and separate us, but of the shared humanity that lifts our spirit and reminds us of what we have in common.
And also turns it into a positive, how he tries to regroup international groups similar to El Sistema.
It does, and I think there's a lesson, a very timely lesson for all of us at this moment. I mean, I was looking at the film with an audience last night, and in addition to violence in the streets, which many of us around the world, in the United States as well as Europe, have experienced in the last several years. There are separation from loved ones, which those of us, we've all lived through the pandemic and been apart from them, been unable to mourn with people, had to communicate remotely through screens, and dealt with vaccines and these sorts of things. All of those issues, remarkably, Gustavo was contending with and dealing with in the film 2 years before the rest of us had to deal with it. So yes, it does feel very timely, and I think to my mind, Gustavo's response is inspirational and really, I think, instructive in the best and most wonderfully surprising way that I turn to for cinema.
I enjoyed how in the documentary you bring us to LA. I'm also in LA, so it's like it's home. But you also takes us to my motherland in city, Mexico City, and Bellas Artes. How much did you enjoy filming there?
Well, believe it or not, I've lived in LA for 30 years now, and it was my first trip to Mexico City. And my gosh, what an incredibly dynamic place. And that hall in particular, you can feel the history of it. It's just rich with music making and the history of music making. And I hope one of the things audiences take away from the film is something that we that were making it did, which was an appreciation of the riches across the planet and the particular riches of individual cities and individual cultures. From being a kid, I loved going to the movies and loved being taken places I'd never been before and seeing and experiencing things I'd never experienced before. And to be able to take audiences to Mexico City, to this beautiful hall, Bellas Artes, to Santiago, Chile, to Berlin, to Hamburg, to LA. I mean, it's a privilege, and I think it's exciting and enriching, and I hope that viewers respond in that same way, because it's magic.
I really appreciate it. So what was it like when Gustavo first saw the documentary? What was his reaction?
Well, I don't know who was more nervous, him or me, because when you have the the privilege and the responsibility of filming someone's life, and you take it seriously, you want the person who's viewing it to feel that you've represented them well. And he, of course, was very nervous to see what we'd done, but it ended up being a very special evening. He was there with his wife Maria and his longtime manager Mark Newbanks, and it was a special evening. I don't normally screen films for subjects, but in this case we did, and because it was the first time I made a film about just a single subject, a single individual. And I'm very glad that we did, because in addition to his appreciation, he had some insight into some dimensions of his life, and some dimensions of the circumstances of life in Venezuela that we just had not been attuned to, and so we were able to take those things from him and make the film better. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Ted, for your time. I love talking to you about Viva Maestro. I enjoyed the documentary, and I'm sure many other people will too.
Well, Nancy, I'm so happy to hear that, and so grateful for you taking the time to talk with us. It's been a very long journey getting this film to audiences. We've been on the COVID runway waiting for takeoff for 2 years till theaters were open again and people were coming back. So to hear your reaction and to know that you enjoyed it is very heartwarming, and makes me look forward to your viewers coming to the theater and enjoying it as you have. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you.